Hi everybody, it's time for our Sunday school lesson. Even though I already told this story to the kids in Chuk, I want to tell it to you too because I love you so much and I want you to hear the stories that I tell the kids here. But today is a very special story. It's a story not many people know about. It's a short story, but it's very important. Do you remember David? He's the boy that was the shepherd, and God chose him to be the king of Israel because it was so important for God to choose a man who loved him, who would listen to him and do his will. And David was that kind of person. He loved to pray and sing about Jesus and about God's creation. And David, God said, was a man after his own heart. That means that David loved Jesus with all his heart, and he wanted to serve him. Well, after David grew up to be a young man and he killed Goliath, he still was waiting for God's time for him to be the king of Israel. Because there was another king in Israel named King Saul. But now David was a man and King Saul was a man who wanted to stay king forever. And he heard that David was going to be the next king. And he got really angry and jealous. And he didn't want David to be the king. But Saul had some children. He had 3 sons, and one of his sons was named Jonathan. And Jonathan, he didn't hate David. He loved him. He felt like David was his best friend, like a brother to him. And so Jonathan would always be friends with David and take care of him and help him. And one day, David and Jonathan met outside of the town. This is a picture of David and Jonathan when they were being friends together. And on this day, Jonathan knew that David was going to have to run away because he knew that his father was so angry that David was going to be the next king that he was going to try to kill David. So he warned David and he said, "You're going to have to leave and run for your life. But here, let me give you some of my things to help you." So he gave him a really good sword, and he gave him a belt to use to carry the sword. He gave him a robe, which is the kind of clothes that kings wear. And he gave him a bow and arrow and said, "You'll need these weapons so you can protect yourself." And then the 2 men, David and Jonathan, they hugged each other and they cried. And David cried the most because he knew he was going to have to leave his friend Jonathan, and he would miss him so much. But they made a promise to each other. David promised Jonathan that if anything bad happened to him, he would take care of his family. And Jonathan promised David the same thing, that if anything bad happened to him, he would take care of David's family. This was the promise they made each other because they were such good friends. But then one day, there was another enemy of Israel, people called Philistines. Well, Saul had to stop chasing after David and go back to protect his home and his land from the Philistines. But on that day, a very sad thing happened. King Saul was killed, but not just King Saul. Jonathan, King Saul's son, David's friend, was also killed in the war, along with 2 other of his brothers. And when David heard that news, he was so sad. He just cried, and he did what he liked to do. He wrote down his prayer, and he made a song. And the song said, "Oh, I am so sad because the mighty have fallen. My friend Jonathan, who was so brave and such a good friend, has fallen. And his father, King Saul, who was a brave man, he too has fallen." And David had all of the men that traveled with him to stop what they were doing, and they gathered together and they sang the song, and they all cried and they all prayed. Well, after that time had passed, the Lord decided it was time for David to be king of Israel. So he told David to go and become the king. And David did. And the people of Israel all loved David because they remember how he had killed Goliath and how he had always tried to serve God. So they let him be the king, and they were happy. But when David was, after he was king for a few years, he thought again about his friend Jonathan, and he remembered the promise. He had promised Jonathan that he would take care of his family. But he didn't know if Jonathan had a family or who was left, because people said that all of the family of King Saul had been killed. So David called a man who had been a servant to the family of Saul. David was on the throne, and he called this man Ziba. And he said, "Ziba, you worked for the family of King Saul, right?" And he said, "Yes, I did for many years." And he said, "Are there any members of the family of Saul still alive?" Well, Ziba thought, and he said, "Yes, I think so." And David said, "Jonathan's family alive?" And Ziba said, "Yes, there is one man still alive. He was just a boy when his father died. But when the news came to the house of the king that the king had been killed and that Jonathan and his brother had been killed, the nurse, that's the lady who took care of the boy, Jonathan's son, picked him up to run and hide. But when she was running, she tripped and fell, and she dropped the little boy. And when she dropped him, he fell so hard it broke the bones in his feet and legs, and he couldn't walk anymore. And there was no doctor to help him, and so he became a cripple. And he can't go anywhere. He just stays in his home. Well, David thought that was such a sad story, and he felt really bad because he had waited so long to check on Jonathan's family. And so he told the servant Ziba, "You go right now, and you bring this boy to me. By the way, what's his name?" And the man said, "His name is Mephibosheth." Can you say that name? It's kind of a hard name to say. Mephibosheth. That was the boy's name. Of course, he's not a boy anymore. He's a grown-up man. So Ziba went, and he found Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, and he said, "King David wants you to come and see him." Well, Mephibosheth was scared because he knew that King David was now king of Israel. And in those days, if a new king came along, sometimes they would kill all of the family members of the old king so people wouldn't remember the old king and they would just remember the new king. And so Mephibosheth was scared that if he went to see the new King David, that maybe David would kill him or have him killed. But there was nothing he could do. He had to obey the king's order. So Mephibosheth went to the palace to see King David. But when he arrived, he couldn't stand up before the king because remember, his feet were lame. His bones had been broken and he couldn't stand before the king. And so David saw Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth began to tell the king how much he respected him and how sorry he was for what had happened and that he wanted to be his servant. He didn't hate the king. He wanted to respect the king. But King David wasn't angry at Mephibosheth. He loved him right away as soon as he saw him. And he said, "Oh, Mephibosheth, you don't have to be my servant. You're going to be my new son. I want you to live with my family here in the palace with my other children. And when it's time to eat, we all sit down at the table together. You're going to have a very special chair that you can sit in at the table. And when you sit at that chair, nobody will see your legs because they'll be under the table. And nobody can see your crooked feet because they've been damaged. they won't see them because they'll be under the table. And they'll just see you as one of my sons sitting there eating together with my family. Well, Mephibosheth was so surprised. He couldn't believe what happened to him. Instead of being punished or even killed, he was going to be adopted by the king. And that's what happened. Mephibosheth became a member of David's family. And every time it was time to eat, they would carry Mephibosheth so he could sit in his special chair and he could eat with all the other boys and girls and men and women, members of the King David's family. And you know, this is a picture of what God has done for us. We're like Mephibosheth. We have been crippled by our sins. We don't have a home. We don't have a future. We have a sad story because we have sin in our lives. And some people are so afraid of God, they're afraid to even pray to him. But God calls us all to come and believe in him through his son Jesus, because Jesus is kind of like Jonathan. He gave his life for us. And now, because Jesus gave his life for us, we can be adopted by God, the Father of Jesus, and we can sit at the same table with all the other children of God, all of us who believe in Jesus. And you know who else will sit at that table? Jesus himself will sit at the table when we're in heaven, and we'll all be there together. All we have to do is just tell God that we believe in Jesus, that he loved us and died for us, and that he rose again from the dead, and that we want to be born again into his family. And we can all do that. I already did that, and I know some of you have already done that. And I hope that everybody that listens to this story will pray and ask Jesus to come into their heart, so that we can all one day sit together at the table of God in heaven and be one big happy family. Well, I love you very much. Thank you for listening to our story today, and I hope to see you on the Granny and Papa page. Maybe you could even color a picture. After I finish this video and post it, I will post the picture that we colored after our lesson, and you can color it too. And if you do that, I'll be sure to send you a surprise in the mail. Thank you very much. I love you. Bye.